The word mission, it seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Like you probably think of folks going overseas, maybe building things, helping out.
Right, that's the common picture, definitely.
Yeah.
But when you actually dig into it, especially using our source today, mission, the contemporary crisis, you find it's, well, way more complex.
Yeah, the history is surprisingly rich and it's really evolving.
Exactly. So what we want to do in this deep dive is unpack that. Look at the traditional ideas and also how mission is understood now. Because it turns out this whole concept, it's under a lot of scrutiny. People are really reevaluating it.
Okay, so before we get to the now, what about the then? Like before the 1950s? The source says mission meant a few specific things.
It did. Yeah, it could mean, the act of sending missionaries out.
Okay.
Or the work they did, the actual activities, or even the place they went, the mission field, which is a term with its own baggage, really.
Right, yeah.
It also meant the sending agency, the organization behind it, sometimes even just a local church that didn't have its own minister yet.
And theologically, it had specific uses there, too.
Uh-huh. Things like spreading the faith, obviously, expanding God's reign, converting people, planting new churches, the kind of language that feels maybe familiar.
But even those uses, the source says, are pretty recent in the grand scheme of things.
That's the kicker. Because originally, for centuries, mission meant something totally different. It was almost exclusively used in theology to talk about the Trinity.
The Trinity? How so?
Specifically, the Father sending the Son, and then both sending the Holy Spirit. That sending was the original mission.
Wow. Okay, so how did it jump from theology about God to sending people places?
Well, the source points to the Jesuits in the 16th century. They were apparently the first to start using mission to describe spreading the Christian faith outwards, even to other Christians like Protestants initially. It was a huge shift.
Taking this internal theological idea and making it about external action.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting and kind of heavy. This change didn't happen in a vacuum.
Let me guess. Colonialism.
You got it. It happened right alongside Western colonial expansion. The timing is, well, it's not coincidental.
Because the very idea of mission implies power, doesn't it?
It really does. You've got a sender, someone being sent, and then the people they're sent to. That structure just screams authority.
Someone's in charge.
Exactly. And historically, that authority was often framed as coming directly from God. The church or missionary societies, even Christian kings or rulers were seen as acting on God's behalf.
Especially in the Catholic context, right? Papal authority or secular rulers giving the green light was kind of crucial.
Absolutely. That legal backing was key to legitimizing the whole enterprise. And naturally, this led to thinking about mission in terms of geography, claiming territory, almost like a conquest of other religions.
Okay. Wow. So that's the historical backdrop. Let's jump forward then. The 20th century sounds like things started to change.
Oh, massively. The 20th century saw a huge modification of that traditional view. And what's really striking is how much self-criticism started coming from inside Christian circles.
Like the church itself started questioning things.
Yes, unprecedented levels of it.
Wow.
Our source mentions early figures like Schutz back in 1930, Peyton in 53, people raising flags.
And then that cluster in 1964. Orchard, Scherer, Dodge, Carden, all critical books in 1 year from people involved in mission.
Exactly. It was a real wave. And more recently, you have someone like Heisig calling mission the selfish war. I mean, that's incredibly strong language.
The selfish war? Wow. So is this criticism normal, or is it a sign things are falling apart?
Well, the source brings in Kramer here, who had this interesting idea. He argued the church is always in a state of crisis.
Always. How does that work?
He saw this constant tension, you see, between the church's ideal nature, what it's supposed to be, and its actual messy human reality on the ground, all its flaws and failures.
Okay.
And Kramer thought that often the church needs to experience failure, even suffering, to actually realize what it's truly about. Maybe for centuries, especially in the West, things felt stable, maybe too comfortable. Perhaps they started believing their own success stories a bit too much.
So the crisis is kind of built in. It forces self-reflection.
That's the idea. So this current wave of self-criticism, maybe it's uncomfortable, but perhaps it's actually a return to a more honest state for the church.
Okay. And the source mentions another way to look at crisis from East Asia.
Right. The idea that the word for crisis combines danger and opportunity, which is such a helpful perspective, I think.
So yes, there are dangers in questioning mission, but also real chances for positive change.
Exactly. It's not necessarily the end. Maybe it's a new beginning. or at least a chance for one.
Now, this crisis in mission, it's not happening in isolation, is it? The source connects it to bigger things happening in the church and the world.
Definitely. It's part of a much wider picture. Several big factors are feeding into it.
Like what?
Well, first, you've got science and technology. Their huge advances, plus growing secularization, have kind of made faith seem, well, redundant to some people. If science can explain things and tech can solve problems, why do we need God? That's the question some ask.
Makes sense. What else?
Then there's the major de-Christianization happening in the West. Europe, North America.
Yeah, you hear about church attendance dropping.
Exactly. The source cites Barrett's stats, huge numbers leaving the church weekly. But interestingly, people like Godin and Daniel were saying this way earlier, arguing that places like France had essentially become mission fields again themselves.
Wow, the tables have turned. The old sending centers are now the mission field.
Kind of, yeah. And that ties into the next point, religious pluralism. Because of migration and that de-Christianization, people in the West now live alongside people of many different faiths much more closely than before.
So you can't just rely on old stereotypes.
Right. You have to reevaluate.
Yeah.
And fascinatingly, the source notes that sometimes people from other faiths seem more active in sharing their beliefs than many Christians do today.
It is interesting. What other factors?
Well, there's the big one, Western guilt. The history of colonialism, the subjugation of people of color. Western churches were deeply complicit in that. And that history creates a lot of understandable shame, hesitancy, maybe even a feeling that Western Christians don't have the right to share their faith with people from cultures they historically oppressed.
A heavy legacy.
Immense. Then there's the economic divide. The massive widening gap between the rich nations, often seen as historically Christian, and the poor nations.
How does that impact mission?
It breeds anger, resentment. People in poverty might be resistant to a message from those they see as privileged oppressors. And it creates a moral discomfort for affluent Christians, too. Is it right to evangelize in the face of such inequality?
Deeply complex issues.
Absolutely. And finally, you have the rise of younger, vibrant churches in, say, Africa, Asia, Latin America. They're demanding autonomy. They're rejecting Western ways of doing church, Western theology.
Developing their own approaches, like liberation theology, black theology.
Exactly. Third world theologies, as they're often called. They challenge the dominance of Western perspectives. And that creates uncertainty back in Western churches about, well, is our way still valid? Is our mission still needed in the same way?
So it seems like every angle is being questioned. The senders, the receivers, the message, the whole foundation.
Pretty much. But again, remember danger and opportunity. The source argues this isn't just a disaster, it's a real chance for a fundamental paradigm shift, a whole new way of thinking about and doing mission.
And the church has done this before, shifted its paradigm.
Oh, yeah. History shows it's happened multiple times. This isn't the first major rethink.
Okay, so let's drill down. The source says this contemporary crisis shows up in 3 key areas. The foundation, the motives and aim, and the nature of mission. Let's take the foundation first.
Right. The problem, according to the source, is that for a long time, mission ran on a pretty thin basis. Someone like Warnock, a key figure, distinguished between supernatural foundations.
Like scripture, belief in one God.
Yeah, the core stuff. But then he also talked about natural foundations.
Okay, remember those.
Things like, well, Christianity is just inherently the best, the absolute truth compared to other religions. That it's universally adaptable to any culture. That Christian missions achieve superior results, and just the historical strength and influence Christianity had shown.
Some of those natural foundations sound a bit problematic today. Triumphalist, maybe?
Definitely. They often dismiss the value in other faiths, other cultures. So that foundation started to look shaky. Then you get to motives and aims.
The why and the what for.
Exactly. And the source says these were often ambiguous, sometimes even, well, impure, as Verkuhl put it.
Impure motives. Like
We'll listed things like imperialism, mission making people better colonial subjects.
Oh.
Cultural motives, basically trying to export the missionary's own superior culture. Romanticism, just wanting adventure in exotic places. And ecclesiastical colonialism, forcing your specific church brand onto others.
Yeah, you can see how mission got tangled up with other agendas.
Totally. And even the theological motives could be fuzzy. Like focusing only on individual conversion could ignore bigger social problems.
Yeah.
Focusing only on the end times, the eschatology, could mean neglecting present suffering.
Okay.
Focusing only on planting churches, plantatio ecclesiae, could make you equate the visible church with God's entire kingdom, which is maybe too narrow.
Yeah.
And focusing only on charity, philanthropy could reduce God's reign to just social improvement, losing the spiritual core.
So always a risk of shrinking the big picture down to fit our limited view.
Seems like it. And these shaky foundations and mixed motives, they led to unsatisfactory practices. What often happened was the new churches just looked like mini-me's of Western churches.
Like a franchise you said earlier.
Yeah, kind of. They got the Western structures, the theology, even the old European confessions of faith written centuries before in totally different contexts.
And they weren't really independent.
Often not for a long time. They stayed under Western control, Western mission agencies, until they were judged mature enough to run themselves. It bred dependency, not partnership.
That's the ecclesiastical export trade Schutz was criticizing.
Exactly. He had that great image. It's like carrying the harvest into a burning barn. Pointless.
Because the problem wasn't out there.
No, he argued the real problem was in the Western church itself. It was exporting its own issues, its individualism, not the pure gospel. He said the West needed to look inward, intramuros.
Focus on fixing its own house first.
That was the powerful argument.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, any numerical success, any growth in converts, was used as proof they were doing it right.
Circular logic.
Pretty much. It fueled this idea that Christianity was obviously superior and other religions were just dying out.
The source mentions some wild predictions from back then.
Oh, yeah. Lars Dille predicting the whole world would be Christian by 1990 based on 19th century stats. Seems incredible now.
And that book title.
Right. Warnick's book, translated as The Loving Christ and Dying Heathenism, it just perfectly captures that absolute certainty they had.
A certainty, well, didn't pan out. Other religions are still very much alive and kicking.
Absolutely. And that reality check led to a lot of confusion, a malaise, as the source calls it, in some mission circles. Max Warren talked about a terrible failure of nerve.
Disappointment, maybe withdrawal, or shifting to just secular aid work.
Yeah, some of that happened. Because the old certainties were gone, but other circles just carried on, business as usual. Still very focused on one-way sending, primarily saving individual souls.
And the source questions if that's really sustainable.
Right. Given everything else we've discussed, is that approach really adequate for the long haul? Ignoring the crisis, trying to go around it, the source says that's just not a real option.
So you can't go back to the old ways, but just adopting secular values isn't the answer either. What then?
A new vision. That's what's needed. Something that learns from the past, the good and the bad, but isn't afraid to build something new. Kramer saw this impasse decades ago, remember?
Yeah, the end of an era, not the end of mission itself.
Exactly. He called for a tougher, less romantic pioneer task. The old optimistic views, Edinburgh 1910, the 60s vibe, they're gone. Fundamentally broken.
So you have to reimagine mission. Boldly and imaginatively, yeah. But still connected to the best parts of its history. And this leads to the core idea. To revise mission, you have to look at its history.
Because there wasn't just one way of thinking about it, even early on.
No way. Even the early church had different theologies of mission. The source uses that great phrase, a pluriverse of missiology and a universe of mission.
Multiple ways of thinking within the one big reality of God's work.
You got it. And these different ways can clash, they can contradict each other, so we have to be critical, figure out what holds up.
And recognize our own biases when we try to define it.
Absolutely. So, keeping all that complexity in mind, the source offers an interim definition, not the final word, but a working model based on its analysis.
Okay, let's break that down. What are the key points? First, Christianity is inherently missionary. It has to share its message. That's not unique. Other faiths do too. But Christianity believes it has a universal truth for everyone. It sees all people as objects of God's saving love. It's not optional. It's core identity.
That universality seems key.
Foundational. Second, missiology, the study of mission, is part of theology. It's committed to the faith, not neutral. Its job is to rigorously analyze mission definitions, history, practice. It's thinking about the doing.
Got it. Study with a purpose.
Third, don't define mission too narrowly or too confidently. It's ultimately bigger than our definitions. We can only make approximations. Needs humility.
Resist putting it in a neat little box.
Exactly. Fourth, mission flows from the relationship between God and the world, shown most clearly in Jesus. It starts with God reaching out, God's self-communication. It's God's initiative, fundamentally.
We're joining in God's work, not starting it.
That's the idea. Fifth, the Bible isn't a simple rulebook for missions. Our practice happens in that messy space between God's plan and our human flaws. Mission is always an act of faith, not a guaranteed formula.
Faith, not formula.
Good. Sixth, the whole Christian life is missionary. The church is missionary by nature. That's rooted in the gospel itself, not just because the world needs help. It's about being, not just doing.
Woven into the fabric of faith.
Precisely. Seventh, foreign missions isn't fundamentally different from home missions. The difference is just scope, geography. The idea that you have to cross salt water to be a missionary, that's rejected. Europe's a mission field too now, right? Mission isn't defined just by who you go to.
Challenges that old map drastically.
It does. Eighth, distinguish mission. Singular from missions. Plural. Mission. Missio Dei is God's big overarching work in the world. Missions are our specific activities, our participation in that bigger work. Helpful distinction.
Missio Dei versus our missions.
Ninth, the task is huge. As broad as human need. It's about the whole gospel for the whole person, spiritual, physical, social, everything is connected. Holistic.
Not just souls, but whole lives.
10th, mission is God's big yes to the world. It means engaging with injustice, poverty, oppression, violence. The church in mission has to be involved in tackling these things, working for justice. It's inherently political in that sense.
An active force for good.
11th, it definitely includes evangelism. Proclaiming salvation, calling for repentance, announcing forgiveness, inviting people into the community of Christ. Sharing the core message is vital.
So proclamation is still essential.
Absolutely. 12th, mission is also God's no to the world. It means resisting worldly values that contradict the gospel. Engaging with the world, yes, but critically, without just blending in or becoming another social movement. Remember the crucified Christ. It avoids being too secular or too withdrawn.
That balance again, in the world, not entirely of it.
That's the tension. And finally, 13th, the church in mission is like a sacrament, a sign. It points to God's kingdom. It helps make it present. It's a sneak peek, a foretaste, God's experimental garden with the first fruits of the Spirit, a powerful image.
Wow. Okay, so we've really gone from that simple initial image to this incredibly rich, complex, challenging picture of mission today.
Yeah, tracing it from a trinity through colonialism to this current crisis, the self-criticism, the global changes. It's quite a journey.
And this crisis, it's not just problems, it's potential. A chance to really rethink and maybe revitalize mission for our time.
Exactly. Not throwing it out, but understanding it better, doing it more thoughtfully, living it more authentically. That seems to be the call.
So thinking about all these facets, God's yes and no, evangelism, justice, the church just being missionary, as you, our listener, reflect on this complex global picture we live in, what part of that broader understanding of mission really clicks with you? What resonates most right now? And maybe how did that shape how you engage with the world, how you see faith in action? Definitely leaves you with something to chew on.